All right, Dr. Ashurina, is that how you pronounce it?
Ashurina.
Ashurina Ream. Welcome back to the Mom Room.
Thank you so much for having me.
I haven't done this in a while. That, a season ago or so, that was my toxic trait was I would press record and then I would be like, oh yeah, how do you pronounce your name?
That's
But that's
okay.
okay. It's okay. That's
With
just,
a name like Ashurina, it's a given that that's going to happen. So I'm
yeah,
good.
yeah. So we got it. So you were on the podcast. I always like to go back and see what the episode number was, because if people listen to this and they're like, oh, I want to hear the other episode. So it's episode 261. And in that episode, we talked about mom guilt, the mental load, and relationship traps to avoid with your partner when you have kids. And that was one of the most downloaded episodes in 2023. Yay, us. And so today we're talking about another topic that I absolutely love that is so just on point for motherhood, and that is burnout.
Mhm.
So I feel like burnout is a buzzword.
Yes.
It's like we hear it all the time, but I don't know that many people really understand what it means or even how to identify if that's what's going on with them. So maybe we could start there and just kind of discuss what burnout is and also what it feels like.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start because I think that we commonly see people use, the words stress and burnout interchangeably, and they are not the same thing. So it's a good thing to have like that foundational bit of information. Obviously, we know what stress is. It's our exposure to stressors or in our environment, whether that's work, raising a family, managing the day to day, and that can be really stressful. And burnout is this prolonged, unrelenting exposure to these stressors that results in what we're feeling. And so it's not just something that we put out there like, oh, I'm feeling so burnt out. I'm burnt to a crisp. It's been researched. And in the last, I'd say 10 years more so, we've looked at parental burnout. And I always think that this is the most fascinating piece about it, because when we think about burnout, we're thinking like
Career.
we're
Yeah.
like people in healthcare on the front lines. What are you doing? Are you a first responder? And we're thinking of how they might experience burnout. But what research has found is that parents are actually experiencing the same thing. And what does that say about parenting in this generation? It's just that the demands are stifling and our support is non-existent. So there are actually, research has identified 4 primary characteristics of burnout. And so this is really kind of objective. It's not just something that we've thrown, like we are pulling from thin air. And like the first piece of it is really, like, you can guess this. You're physically and emotionally exhausted. And the idea of parenting just feels like too much. And you were like leaning into that, like, I'm going to have my first coffee, my second coffee, my third coffee, and nothing is giving you the energy that you need to sustain your role. It just feels like nothing is doing it. The second characteristic is emotional detachment. And emotional detachment is when you feel this distance between yourself and your child. And it feels like you can't respond in a helpful way. I feel this sometimes, like when I'm in a point where I know I'm getting really close to this experience of burnout, and I share this kind of example, like your kid's doing something and they're like, watch me, look at this. And they want to interact with you, but you have nothing in the tank to engage. And it seems like so silly, but there is this emotional detachment because you are so exhausted. The third piece is that you're feeling this loss of competence. You feel like you're not cut out for the role. You feel like it's like this inadequacy, like, I'm just not doing a good enough job. I'm not cut out for this. And the final piece of what we see with burnout is that it's a change. It's a shift from how we were functioning before. So you see all those three, the three kind of primary characteristics, and then we know that it's a change from how we once were functioning. And it's really different. So we look at burnout, obviously, from this experience, like that's generalizable to people's careers, but this is specific to your parenting role. And how you know it's burnout and not something else is that you might be able to engage with your friends, with your career, with everything else just fine, but it's the role of parenting feels like it is draining your batteries. And like to put it a little bit more actionable, like what does this actually look like? These are obviously like research-based characteristics. The parents that I meet with in therapy, they all present differently. Some people might say like, I'm having more physical symptoms. Like I have more stomach aches. I have headaches. I feel this tightness in my chest. Maybe they are leaning into more addictive behavior. Like I'm unwinding regularly with alcohol or something else. Like maybe it's overindulging in sweets. It can look like just feeling more aggressive or irritable, neglectful, even with our children, like we're doing the bare minimum repeatedly over time. It's not just like I'm doing this for a short time to get through what we're going through, but we're leaning more into that. So when we're not addressing these symptoms, like it looks so different from parent to parent, but you're not feeling well, you're not feeling like yourself, and you are really feeling detached from your child or children.
So there can be somebody that's a parent that's working full time outside of the house and is experiencing burnout, but only in one specific role and not necessarily the other. So
Correct.
oh, like I didn't realize that was, for some reason I was thinking like if someone's experiencing burnout, it was like perhaps it's the root cause of it is like parenting and like life at home, but that you would experience it elsewhere as well. But that's
You
not the
definitely
case.
could. You definitely could. But that's just not the case for everyone.
Okay.
Um, it's so different from person to person. But yes, we'll find people that feel like, okay, this is draining me and I'm seeing this carried through like in every area of my life. But for some people, it's like, this is the thing. Maybe it is like, for example, if it was work burnout, you'd see people that might say like, this is what's draining me. But when I'm away, I feel like myself. I feel more like myself. So it is very unique to each person.
So for moms specifically, what would you say are psychological and emotional factors that we experience as moms that would contribute to burnout?
There are so many factors that contribute, even beyond the psychological and emotional factors, I would say. One of the pieces, and I was kind of talking about this a little bit before we jumped on to record, but there's this like, I'm the ideal candidate here.
Yeah.
When we think about perfectionism as part of our personality, a part of our trait, perfectionism is one of the biggest um, indicators of burnout. Because when we have a tendency to have things, and I mean, this is like a no-brainer, right? It's like one of the biggest predictors is burnout. When we set these expectations of ourselves and we just expect things to go a certain way. We are maybe rigid in our ideology. We want things to happen because we're used to the predictability and the rhythm of how life was pre-kids. We tend to have a more difficult time when we bring kids into the picture because obviously, as we know, kids don't follow predictable
No,
rhythmic patterns. They are their own human beings with all of their
they're
unique.
not robots, and it's
Exactly.
unfortunate. Yeah.
So yeah, being having that perfectionistic tendency, but then there's also things that are individual, but then there's things within the environment. So I don't want to just put the onus on the person that's experiencing this, but when we think about just individual qualities and characteristics, we think about perfectionism. We think about having poor coping skills. Maybe it's poor even parenting skills. Like we weren't taught the skills that it takes to raise children because they were not handed to us. We might have limited supports. And then there's so many environmental factors, right? If it's low income and not having access to the care that we need, whether that's medical care, all the things that are within our environment. There is one particular piece, and I'm sorry if I'm jumping all around, but I'm like thinking of interactions that I'm having with parents. One of those things is having this over-tending or over-parenting, like this intensive parenting.
I just heard this term not too long ago because it was a TikTok and they were talking about I'm in Canada, but the TikTok was about the Surgeon General's report that they put out about how stressed out parents are nowadays. And part of what they were talking about, like as the cause of that was this intensive parenting. And I was like, oh, I've never heard that term before.
Yeah, so it is a thing. It's been researched for decades. And we think about like this profile of parenting. And I mean, obviously, our culture really feeds into this idea of intensive parenting. And truthfully, parenting in this day and age, we almost don't feel like we have an option. It
Mm,
almost feels like it's an automatic requirement to be a good parent is to have this intensive parenting. And what is intensive parenting? It's this every bit of our energy, all of our resources, our financial, our emotional, every resource that we have,
mental.
mental, is poured into child rearing. And so, how can we not be burned out when
Yeah.
we're told that being a good parent means that we should be an expert when it comes to their diet, when it comes to their physical development, when it comes to their literacy and reading and all of the things. And I know I'm missing like a billion things that we are taught online to become experts in. And we're pouring all this into our kids. And now we're over tending to them. And we're no longer letting kids be kids
Mm,
and letting errors happen. And so when we're so hyper focused on those things, we have nothing else left in the tank because we are over tending to them. So this obviously contributes to burnout. I mean, as we take a step back and we take a look at it, like, yeah, of course, right?
yeah.
And I heard a story. I was on a training with Dr. Shefali Gandhi, and she's always talking about conscious parenting. And then she had this idea of like intensive parenting and what it's like to parent now and how we feel like we're behind if we're not doing the things that other people are doing. She was talking about taking her child to sign them up for dance. Was it dance or gymnastics? And she was taking her 8-year-old for like a very introductory, like first time dance class. And the instructor said, 8, like you are so behind.
No. Oh my
And,
God.
and it was like an 8-year-old, like our introductory dance classes, like 3-year-olds are taking these classes. And it just kind of shows you like this direction that we're headed as parents where it's because of our environment, like we're putting our kids in activities because we feel like we have to, and we start them at 3. And if they're not in at 3, like we're already behind. And
I
that's
know.
kind
And
of what it
then
feels like to parent.
you talk to another parent and they're like, oh yeah, like my kids are in soccer on Saturdays and we have karate on Tuesdays. And then you feel like a piece of shit if your kid is not in anything. And like, I was just talking about this exact topic. My sister and I were saying how like when we were growing up, we were playing outside on dirt piles and just, we had so much unstructured free play. And
Yes.
now it's like everything is scheduled to the max. It's like
Yes.
we're constantly, and speaking of like intensive parenting, a part of that is also the need to entertain and have your kids be engaged fully in something at all times. I remember seeing this TikTok about, it was something to do with like, here's the best like educational shows for your kid, and it's going through all these shows, and in my mind I was like, Jesus Christ, can't he just watch something for fun? Like
Yeah.
everything is just like, you have to be engaged, you have to be doing an activity, learning something, like trying to get better at something. It's never just, did you read Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation?
No,
He
I
talks a
probably
lot
should.
about that, how nowadays there's so much less unstructured free play, and kids don't even have the opportunity to sort things out themselves because parents will step in immediately because parents are constantly watching and on their kids. It's
Mhm.
very interesting.
It is. I don't remember. I always say I played sports most of my life, like all of my life. But then when I think back, my husband and I talk about this, we're both like college athletes. And I didn't start playing an organized sport until I was much older, like 11.
Yeah.
I don't even think I was 11 until I started playing sports.
Yeah. I think we started, like, I played volleyball in the NCAA, and I think I started playing in grade 7.
Exactly. Look at that.
Yeah.
How did you do that? Such a delayed
Yeah.
start time,
I
It's
know.
like such a wild concept. Now kids are in 3rd grade and they're already playing competitive sports.
Mm-hmm.
And so we see this trickle down effect. Parents are feeling pressured, kids are feeling pressured. We're this pressured generation of we have to do more, we have to be more with less support, less time. And we're wondering why we're feeling the way we're feeling. And it's true about like kids, like we feel like the need to entertain them because there's educational activities and educational shows and all the things that you should do over your summer break. And it is too much. It is too much. And truthfully, I think what it does is it kind of stifles the growth of our children because they are no longer capable of being creative and being problem solvers. And like we talk about like some of the best, like most creative and amazing moments in my idea are the ones that are created out of boredom, not out of like being so busy. We don't have enough time to be creative because we are just inundated with things
My
constantly.
gosh, that is so relatable just for like me, you know, because I'm so busy and then I start to feel like I suck as a content creator because I have no time to be creative and even think my own thoughts to try and put something out. And I remember having a meeting with the guy that I work with, Sean, and I was like, I literally need to schedule time into my week, which sounds crazy, like to just sit and think. Like, oh, a new parenting article came up. Like, what are your thoughts on that, Renee? And it's like, when you're so busy, you don't have time to be creative and to think about things. Sometimes I drive in the car and I just don't listen to anything.
I can relate to that.
And I just kind of like sit there and think, and I'm like, wow, look at all these thoughts I have. Like, where did those come from?
I always joke that the like only times that I ever think is like when I'm vacuuming, when I'm like
Oh
walking
my God,
or
I
like
love vacuuming.
like hiking, or when I'm driving because I do
Yeah.
drive in silence. If I'm by myself, particularly, I will have like nothing on, and people are like, "Wow, that's really strange." I'm like, "It's not. It's like this crazy brain can take over," and I love it. But truthful, we're so overscheduled. Our kids are overscheduled, and what happens is actually, I don't think people realize that we end up setting ourselves up. Parents will come to me like wondering why their kids need more and are so discontent. And it's because we were on this rat wheel of providing activity after activity after like thing after thing after thing. And then now they don't know even how to entertain themselves. And it's not for a lack of trying, it's trying too much.
Yep.
My parents, we joke about this at our home. I mean, I think when we like share childhood stories, I'll spare you all those. But my parents, I don't remember them ever playing with me.
Never.
Not once. Not even once. I don't remember. And I like, obviously there are pros and cons of that, but we've swung like so far to the other end of the spectrum. We went from these like disengaged parents, and then we have, particularly millennials, wanting to heal so much, but we've sent it into this other side of the spectrum where we are intensive and we are over parenting, we are over tending, and we're trying our best. And I want to like say that and like validate that. Like we are trying our best to do a great job. But I think what we don't realize is that we're doing so much that we're causing harm to ourselves, which then has this obviously trickle down effect into our kids, our families. And we are the people that will experience the detriments of that.
I remember every single day after dinner, my parents would sit in the living room and have a tea together. Can you imagine?
Yeah. And you were like, cool, look at them go. Let me go do something else.
Can you imagine? Like my sister and I are like, in the basement doing choreographed dances to Spice Girls or something. And my parents are like, no, every day after dinner, they sat in the living room and talked and looked at the newspaper and had tea. Like that is like a core memory in my mind. And it's like, let's bring that back,
I know it. No, I'm with you there. Obviously, grew up we're probably the same exact age because I did the same thing to Spice Girls.
Oh, totally. I used to dress my sister up. She's younger. She's like 5 or 4 years younger than me. And I would dress her up as different Spice Girls for her.
Oh my goodness.
So if families or people listening find themselves, if they're listening to us talk about like intensive parenting, and I feel like honestly, like we're all doing it because this is the culture of parenting right now for some reason. What are steps that people can take, even just like small daily changes to kind of break that cycle of, being overscheduled and being intensive. I know for me, Milo's school is like 25-minute drive, and we drive him every day. And it would be very easy for me to let him have his tablet or his Nintendo in the car, but it's like a no. Like if we're just doing a short car drive, there's no tablet, no Nintendo, and I'm either talking to him and there you go, that's another like intensive moment, like constantly feeling like you need to like engage in conversation. Sometimes I just let the car be quiet and I look at him in the mirror and he's just staring out the window, and I'm like, good. Stare out the window, like, look at the trees, and he'll start talking about like one of the trucks that went by or something. And I'm just like, good, like you be bored back there. But for people listening, what are some things that we can start changing to get out of that cycle?
Yeah, great question. There are like a lot of practical things. And I think one of the biggest takeaways, I don't know if you've read the book Burnout by Emily and Amelia Nagoski. It's a great book.
No,
it's a great book.
That sounds good though.
Yes, put that one on the list.
Is it about burnout in general or like motherhood specifically?
They do touch on motherhood and burnout. And I think it's such a great book because they talk about the stress response cycle. So the stress response cycle in our bodies and what happens when we have this accumulation of stress. But one of the biggest things is they talk about like we're so used to treating burnout from like let's address the stress in our environment. Like let's remove stressors, let's do all of these things. But they talk about addressing burnout by treating the stress in our bodies. And one of the most powerful things that we can do to really resolve the stress response in our body is nobody wants to hear this, like physical activity. Like it's the number one thing that can kind of close the loop. And what people don't realize is when we're dealing with burnout as parents, it's activating our stress response cycle, just like not to this degree, but if like an animal were chasing you in the wilderness and it's activating your fight or flight system, and your body is doing all of those things. And that's why you notice you feel uncomfortable when you're burned out and you're stressed out and your anxiety is high. It's because there's this activation of hormones and neurotransmitters in your body that are shifting everything and changing everything. But we aren't doing anything to address it. Like in like a scenario where you're being chased down, you're running, you're resolving that, that you're closing the loop on that stress response.
Is it like
cycle.
Getting energy out almost?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's what are we doing? And obviously we don't have to go for a run, but it's doing something physical to really ground yourself and close that loop. And there's so many suggestions on how you can do that are research-based. I actually talk about this in my parental burnout workshop. I go over all of the things that we can do. It doesn't have to be like high intensity if that's not your thing. But then I also talk about like there's 3 things that I usually will target with the parents that I meet with. And it's like the 3 S's we talk about. How do we develop space? How do we have support? And really, I would say like making sure that the right supports are in place for us. And obviously this is different for each person. And then also self-compassion, which is one of the most powerful tools that we can have, because we know, and science has really uncovered how being critical to ourselves will also have that same effect of increasing our cortisol and our stress response hormones. And when we have self-compassion and we are more self-compassionate, how it can have the opposite effect. And it can really help to have that like love and bonding hormones for ourselves.
Does self-compassion have anything to do with, because I feel like I try and do that often. Let's say it's like, I always give the example of a sunny Saturday afternoon, but I'm exhausted. And so we're inside watching a movie. Normally, like that would make me feel so guilty. Like, what are you doing? The sun is out. Like you have to be outside doing something, And so I try to really think about the situation and be like, Milo's having a great time. Like we're laying on the couch, we're watching a movie. It's not a big deal. Is that an example of like giving yourself grace or self-compassion?
Yes. So self-compassion is exactly that. When we think about what a majority of our thoughts are like. A majority of our thoughts are going to be like they're negative and they are self-critical. And it's not turning them like upside down. I think that's the misconception that we have, is that when we're self-compassionate, we are like this toxic positivity, like internal dialogue that says like, it's a beautiful day, I'm so grateful. And then like having a slew of like gratitude statements. It's not that. It's really approaching yourself like a good friend, like that one friend that you like, they are the voice of reason, that they can come to you and be like, Ashurina, like, of course you're stressed out. Like, this is what's all going on. Like, it doesn't have to happen today. Why don't you try again tomorrow? And that's like that self-compassionate voice. It's not that person that's like, come on, get with it. There's so much to be grateful for today. And they're not the person that's like, how dare you? How did you do that? It's kind of that middle road that's just telling you like, this is hard and it's going to be okay. We got this. So I always think about when my self-compassionate self, because I have to access this quite a bit personally, it's the person that's tending to that pain inside, that's like acknowledging it. It's not just giving you like the positive statement. It's saying like, Renee, today was hard. Like, you had a lot on your plate and you deserve to rest. Like, it's going to be okay. It's like, I can see that you're having a hard time with this, and that's all right. It's acknowledging like your humanity and saying like, this is going to be okay. And even having like, maybe you do have some mantras that you go to. And my biggest piece is like, what is a good mom? Like, where did that definition come from? Where did those like those targets that I think of every time it's sunny, I have to be outside? Like, is that a me value? Is that somebody else's value? Is that,
And like, I didn't grow up that way. So like, I don't know where all these things come from. And then usually when I'm in those situations, I look over at my husband or, and he's just like enjoying the day. And I'm like, oh, must be nice to like not have these. He's like, what's the big deal? Like, we're just like, it's Saturday. We're all relaxing. Like Milo can relax too. And it's like, good point. Good point. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, where did we get the idea that in order to be having a good time or to be, doing what's right for a family means that we have to be busy or active or productive or doing more?
Yeah.
It's funny when I ask my son, my older son, what his best memories, or what was the best part of the weekend or the best part of your day. It's always the smallest moment that I didn't even think about. And he's taught me so much about life. We were sitting in our backyard, which is not big. And we were sitting there. We were like, I threw together dinner and I'm like talking about rotisserie chicken from Costco. Like, it was something that like we threw together, put it on a plate. We went back there and we were just eating outside. And he looks over and he's like, I love our family. This is the best. Can we do this all the time? And I'm like, this is what you need. It's like, you don't need me to take you to the pumpkin patch today. You don't need me to like, go out and book a vacation or have a day of adventure, spend all this money, keep myself busy, or have you in an activity. He truly just enjoys it when we're there together and I'm asking him a question or we're, engaging. And I don't want to say that this is like an all day thing, because I'm not doing that all day. I just try to show up for these like little moments so that we know that we're connecting. And after something like that, I'll notice even everything will change. Can you lay with me before bed, mommy? Like, can you read me in my book? Like, because he wants to be even closer because we had that like moment. So just reminding myself that some of those ideas that I have in my head are not even, that's not the benchmark. It's something I have kind of adopted from other people, what I've seen around, and it's not what my family needs. That's okay for another family, but it's not what my family needs today.
It's interesting because if you think about what you see on social media, it is always like the big grand things. And so I feel like that puts it into our heads that we should be doing that too. Like, oh my God, look how much fun they had, and like, I should be doing that with my family too. You never just see people eating rotisserie chicken in their backyard on social media.
Let me set the standard.
Content idea.
Like, forks right out of the rotisserie. No, that's so true. And I think it's actually changed the landscape of parenting. Like, what we see on social media, how people portray parenting, they didn't obviously, and we know this, like they didn't show us like the 15 takes before where nobody
Right.
wanted to take the picture or the video, and what it was like driving there and packing the things and, getting in the lines. But that's not real life. And truthfully, like a large percentage of people are not experiencing that. So can you
Mm-hmm.
still have a good life and not do those things? Can you
Mm-hmm.
still, raise kids that are happy and not do all those things? And I know the answer, and you know the answer. And it's
Mm-hmm.
absolutely, I sit across from people every day, like hundreds. I've interviewed probably thousands at this point, um, where I ask them every single intake I do with any client I've ever met with, I ask about their childhood. And not one person, I cannot recall one person who has brought up the grand vacation or the expense that their parent put out for whatever. It's the moments, and like we always talk about how their parents made them feel, whether they were acknowledged, whether they felt seen, whether their parents showed up for them, and if they felt like they were affectionate and genuine.
Mm-hmm.
No one has ever in the history of therapy clients brought up to me, my parents read the right script. They, made my meals, and I remember having fiber, protein, carbohydrate. Now I'm just being silly, but like, yeah,
I know exactly what you're talking, because these are the things that we literally stress about to be
yeah,
a good parent.
we've created these benchmarks that truthfully don't hold a candle to like a good conversation and a silly, joking moment.
So interesting. When you were saying that, I was thinking about in my PhD, I did this 2-week training thing
Hmm.
in Minnesota for attachment.
Yeah.
And so we went through transcripts from the attachment interview and we're like coding it. And then we had to answer questions like the adult attachment interview. And learning all about that made me think so much about growing up and my relationship with my parents. And it's exactly what you're saying. Like all the things that stood out to me, and I have a terrible memory, but was like, oh, in grade school, if I would get in trouble at school by a teacher or something, I always felt like my mom was on my side. Like
Yeah.
that was one of the things that stood out to me. Like I never felt like she was always taking the teacher's side and like I was a bad kid, and like I never felt that way. And it
Hmm.
was little things like that that kept coming up. And I was like, holy shit. Like my mom obviously didn't have the internet back then, didn't have social media, she was just doing what felt right. And that was that. But obviously she did it right. And
Right.
those were the things that were important and that stood out to me. And I was
Hmm.
like, this is so interesting. And you're basically saying the same thing. Like those are the things that people remember.
I, and similarly, living an entire life with a mom that I know didn't do it right all the time. But the thing that I can say about my mom is that she always showed up. And it's crazy because this goes against everything that we see on social media. Like I am a grown woman, and I know that like if I did anything and I were to show my mom, if like it was a paper I wrote and I read it to her because I loved to do that when I was growing up, she would always act like everything I did was amazing.
Mm,
And she would tell me, she'd be like, that was the best paper I'm like, it's funny because on social media, they like tell you don't do this. Like they
don't
give you
ever.
scripts. Like don't tell them it's great. Tell them
Don't
like,
say
what
you're
do you
proud of
think
your
about?
kid.
Yeah.
No. They
You
should
know?
be proud of themselves. Like I'm gonna make a funny TikTok soon because I was thinking about all these things that I go to say to Milo and then I stop and I'm like, oh, I can't say that anymore. Even just simple things like he gets in the car after school and I'm like, oh, like, did you have a good day? And I'm like, no, Renee, don't say that. What was it that made you laugh today? You have to say that instead. I was like,
It's such a silly concept. And truthfully, as an adult, I look back on those moments and how important they are to me that it didn't even matter if it was a terrible paper, but she made me feel like I had the capacity to do
yeah.
anything. And so I didn't receive it as some like external, now I need external appraisal for like every single thing I do. I was just like, it built something inside of me where I'm like, somebody believes in me and I believe in myself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I have this one particular memory, like of all the memories in my life, I was an undergrad and I drove like an hour and a half to college. Like that's how far my college was from my home. And I lived on campus. I had gone home for the weekend and I forgot my backpack at home. I drove all the way back to college. I got there and I had an exam the next day, and I called my mom and I'm like, Mom, I forgot my backpack there. My mom gets in the car, drives it all the way there. It was late. And that is the thing that, like, when I think about, like, what did my mom do for me? And obviously this is like might be a small thing to some people, but it just showed me like I was a priority. She invested in me, whatever like, if I needed something, she was going to be there. I clearly had some great big things that have happened in a vacation here or there, but those were not the things that stood out to me. So if I'm off on a tangent now, but that's basically when we think about moments, things that are important, it's not going to be the things that we have like now created this benchmark from what we see on social media of having matching shirts and going to Disneyland or like, although those are great. And if you can do them, do them.
Yeah, it is fun.
But don't put all the pressure on yourself. Like, yeah, totally. I want to do all those things, but
It's funny.
That's not what's moving the needle in parenting. It's the little things.
Since we're talking about parents being awesome, let me just tell you another story that I thought about when I was doing the attachment thing. And I do find once you become a parent, you start to look back on your own parents and think like, oh my God, like that must have been so difficult for them. And they still, so this is the story that I want to tell you. So as I was saying, I played volleyball in the NCAA, full scholarship. I'm from like a small town in Northern Ontario in Canada. That's like crazy, you know, like full ride to like some big school in Florida. And my parents were probably like, this is amazing. Like our daughter goes to school in Boca Raton, like full scholarship. After the first year, I wanted to quit. I was miserable. It was such a terrible experience. I loved all my friends there, but like the environment, like just not, no, not good at all. And I would cry like every day. I just wanted to go home. When I told my parents that I wanted to leave Florida, go back to school at home where now they're going to be paying tuition and I'm going to live at home, they didn't even question it. They were just like, it's almost like they knew, like, she's not happy. This is not going to be what she's doing for the rest of her life. Like, this is just a cool experience. Why are we going to pressure her to continue doing something where she's miserable, away from home? And it was like a non-issue. At the time, I thought nothing of it. I was just like, yeah, I'm coming home. Like, and they were like, okay. Now thinking back and putting myself in their shoes, I'm like, holy shit. They must have been like, you're giving up this full scholarship, living in Florida, all these opportunities. Like, that like blows my mind.
It's an incredible feeling though, to know that the people that you love are going to be there no matter what. And that's like what that action showed you in the moment.
And like
I think
supporting and trusting.
I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to criticize you. I'm not going to tell you all of the things that you're going to miss out on. I'm just going to say like, okay, let's do this.
Yeah.
It's a very safe feeling when we're talking about attachment, right? Like a very safe feeling knowing like I can go to you with anything.
Yes.
That is what makes like these relationships, like that is what makes a relationship. And I think when we even flip it back to ourselves, like what makes this relationship important, like what do we need out of like our partner? Like sometimes like expecting that, like the security, that non-judgment, that I'm going to be there for you. I'm going to notice you. You're seen. It's really similar. Obviously not exactly, but.
Okay. We got off topic, but I love this conversation.
I love a tangent. I love a good tangent.
We went from like burnout to like parenting to like, let's talk about our own parents. Like we just go everywhere.
This is my brain. A spider web.
Me too. You're like, oh, well, when I was little, my mom did this. I'm like, oh yeah, well, listen to this. So my parents did this. Like,
I could also share like 50 stories about where they got it wrong. So I don't want to like ever present like a perfect life, because it's very far from that. But I always want to highlight like what people take away.
Like what matters.
Totally. Because when we're in the trenches and we are just grinding and we're not able to do all of those things that we think we need to. And I think that's why, like, that's what we're getting at here is it's not all of the fancy stuff and creating the traditions. And although they sound great and they can be great if you want to do them, I think just showing up in our most authentic selves and like, I guess, really truthfully healing ourselves before we show up for our kids is the most important thing that we can do.
So if someone's listening right now, and to go back to the burnout topic, if they have listened to this conversation and they're like, you know what, I think that's what I'm experiencing. What are the first steps to making changes to get out of that? And at what point do you say to yourself, I need to actually see somebody for professional help?
Great question. I always talk about addressing the small stressors, like when they show up. Like when I'm noticing, and some of the very first signs of burnout is when you're starting to feel a little bit more irritable and you're like feeling some irritability, maybe you're feeling fatigue more often than not. We want to address that. So when we have stressors, and this is like addressing a chip in your windshield versus when it's like all cracked, like it's all cracked now you can no longer see. So the stressors are those things, the little chips. And then when it gets to burnout, like it's decreased all visibility. And then it's like, okay, I'm having these stressors. Let me figure out what I need to do here to better care for myself. And it's tending to our needs. So like I said, we want to create some space for ourselves. What like margin. We talk about margin all the time. I think this is one so important for parents who will tend and lean like kind of more towards burnout. Maybe they overextend themselves. Maybe they overschedule themselves. Like, how can I say no? Like, how can I establish pretty decent boundaries? Saying no to that thing, whatever it is also saying yes to something else. And I think we have to remind ourselves that when I'm saying no to something, I'm making room for a yes, whether that's for myself and my family. And that is incredibly important. So like establishing some boundaries, saying no, creating space. Like I just did this for like this season. My son does play sports. He's like loves sports. And this season I said, no, like we're not going to play a sport. We did last season. We're not going to do it this season because I know this time of year can get a bit busy. And I'm like, you know what? We're not going to do that. And it's interesting because I will run into parents like, are you guys playing? And I'm like, nope, we're not this season. And it's easy to like feel that guilt of everyone else around us is doing it. And that seems like a simple no, but it can be challenging when you feel like the pressure from your children, from the, your community, yourself. So saying no to something, creating time, not overscheduling, like not saying yes to every invitation. Sometimes it's not even taking a call. Like if a call is going to drain you, or if you know that hanging out with somebody and it's like going to drain your battery even more, you have to establish a boundary that says like, I can't make space for people, things, places, all that that's going to drain me even more. And if I do say yes, I want it to be intentional and I want it to make sure that it's like nourishing. And it does help me. So creating space, being self-compassionate, having that language, being really mindful of like how we talk about ourselves, and like not the, oh, here I go, I did it again. I would mess this up. And targeting some of those thoughts and that language that we use to talk about ourselves, because we do know that it can impact how stress is showing up in our body, and really activating our supports. And this is tricky because obviously we don't all have the same access to support, whether that's delegating tasks to other people. But also it's like when those people do text, if they do text or call and say like, hey, how can I help you? Taking them up on that offer, like whatever small thing it is, like, hey, actually, could you drop this off for me? I had to do this a few weeks back. My son had fall break. And I had two different girlfriends, which I'm so thankful that I have people like this in my life who are like, hey, because I didn't have anything in place for my son. Like my older son, he was going to be home all day and like I had to work. And they're like, why don't you drop him off with me? And they had like same age kids. It would be great. Or like my other friend, like, why don't I take him to go do this? I'm like, usually I don't want to burden people. I don't want to be a burden. That's what it feels like, especially if you're not used to delegating things. And I said yes. I was like, I would love that. And it felt really uncomfortable in the moment, but I was so thankful to have somebody that was there, and also to like exercise that yes, that usually feels very uncomfortable. So really leaning into support, maybe even asking, getting in the practice of being like, hey, I know you offered, a few months ago, you said any way that I could help you, and I'm here to cash in on that. But really thinking of ways of how we can activate the people around us to like lean in.
And where does our partners, for those of us that are married, living with our partner, how can they help? How can you maybe like bring the conversation to them? Because I feel like and especially for moms, we're like, we should just be like, go, go, go. Like, we got this, we can do everything. So it can be an awkward thing to say, like, I'm struggling, like, I'm not happy, I feel burnt out. How can we bring that up to our partners, and how can they help the situation?
When we think about burnout, I think one of the vulnerabilities, the risk factors is when we have a partner that maybe is not stepping up to the challenge. This can contribute, like when we're carrying a majority of the mental load, the physical load, the emotional load, all of those pieces when it's really, and this does happen. So actually being a mom increases your chances of experiencing burnout because as we know, historically, women tend to bear the majority of the household labor and tasks. So very real scenario. And I think having open conversations, and so often like people that I meet with I'm met with a bit of a resistance because it's kind of like one of those situations. Well, how does my partner not know? And why do I have to coach them? Because this kind of lends to increasing my load or adding another thing to my plate that I actually don't want to have to coach somebody. And truthfully, it's like they're both hard. And it's hard to be in a partnership where you feel like you're doing this alone. And it's also hard to want to share this with your partner and say, this is what I need from you because I'm burnt out. And we have to kind of choose which direction, which is best suited for our, like each scenario. And I would say that if your partner is willing and open and you're with a person that's reasonable and cares about you and is going to hear you out, my guess is that having that conversation with them is going to move the needle. And I'm here and I'm speaking from the perspective of two people that are in a partnership that respect one another and genuinely want to see each other do well. If you're in a partnership where you're going to kind of get blown off and someone says like, hey, that's in your head, it sounds like a you problem, that we have a deeper issue here. But if you're in a situation where you genuinely think your partner is there to support you and cares, saying like, hey, I don't know if you've noticed, but I'm really feeling like I'm at my end. And these are the things that when I am responsible for them completely on my own, it makes me more irritable. I'm finding that I have less patience for you and our kids. I just can't show up for myself. And when I can't show up for myself, I don't feel like I'm showing up the best for my family. And this is like what I would need from you, like from beginning to end. And that's like one of those things that Erica from Momwell and I always talk about when we're talking about like redistribution of the labor in our home, is that when you assign something, like when you and your partner sit down and say like, hey, what are you responsible for? What am I responsible for? And if you're responsible for the laundry, you're from the beginning to the end. That's your responsibility. I don't want to close the loop for you. I don't want to remind you, because when I have to do those things, it's still increasing my mental load. So when you say you're taking over, you're going to say like, you're going to pay attention to when are the kids like running low on socks or, uniforms or whatever they've got going on, and you're going to wash, dry, put away, fold, put away. It's all yours. When the detergent's low, that's you. And when it's not going to happen perfectly, because obviously we're human and we expect that it's not going to happen perfectly, especially if you have been kind of manning the ship for so long. So expect to be some wrinkles in that plan, but talk to your partner about like what you need to hand off. Like, this is increasing this experience for me of burnout, and I really need you to step up in these ways and be really clear and bring it up when they're not holding their end of the bargain, when they're not, pulling their weight.
When you were talking about that, it made me think of Fair Play, like the book and the cards that they have so if you're listening and you're like, where do I start? Get the Fair Play book, read it with your partner, get the deck of cards, go through it. And I think that's a good like visual way to bring up the conversation and have them actually understand. Well, thank you so much for coming back on. This was great.
Course.
Can you tell everybody where they can find you online, and also if you have like courses or anything coming up that you want to share?
Yes, of course. So I am also Psyched Mommy online. So that is on like every social media platform. And my website is psychedmommy.com. I actually do have a workshop that I host on parental burnout itself. And it's a really, like I would say, it's $37 for the workshop. And it has all of the very practical tools and it comes with a workbook. And if people access it at any point, they will have unlimited access. And if I ever update it, they will continue to have access to the most up-to-date version of the workshop. And I love this topic. I love teaching on this topic because it's a very real
And it's
experience.
probably very common.
It is. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm no stranger to this experience. So that's probably why I, I really
You
enjoy
speak so
teaching.
well about it. You're like, I'm a expert in this topic in more than
If
one
I'm not
way.
careful, I will find myself there, really quickly.
Okay, well, thank you so much, and you'll have to come back on again.
I would love that. Thank you so much for having me.
That was so good. Yeah, that was great. I love going off topic.